Most Isolated Alaska Prison, Spring Creek. A full crime documentary from the edge of America. On the edge of the North Pacific, beyond mountain walls and frozen seas, sits Spring Creek Correctional Center, Alaska's most isolated maximum security prison. Built to house the state's most dangerous offenders, Spring Creek has been the subject of lawsuits, federal investigations, and national scrutiny, according to court filings, news reports, and Alaska Department of Corrections records. This documentary examines how geography, policy, and human behavior collide inside a prison designed to hold men society believes cannot live anywhere else. There is a prison in America where escape is pointless. Not because the walls are higher, but because even if you got out, there is nowhere to go. No roads. No towns. No help. Just ocean, ice, and mountains that kill faster than any guard ever could. According to court filings and news reports, this place holds Alaska's most violent inmates, men sentenced not just to time, but to isolation at the edge of the world. This is Spring Creek Correctional Center. And once you're sent here, you don't come back the same. Chapter 1: The End of the Road. At the southern edge of Alaska's Kenai Peninsula, where the land narrows and the mountains lean toward the sea, there is a road that simply stops. It doesn't end at a town square. It doesn't end at a harbor. It ends at a fence. Beyond that fence sits Spring Creek Correctional Center, a maximum security prison carved into rock, wind, and isolation. According to Alaska Department of Corrections records, this is where the state sends inmates it considers the most dangerous, the most unmanageable, or the most disruptive to other facilities. Spring Creek isn't hidden. It's exposed. From the outside, it looks almost peaceful. Pine forests. Cold blue water. Snow-covered peaks rising behind concrete walls. On clear days, the nearby town of Seward glows like a postcard destination, tour boats, cruise ships, souvenir shops selling images of whales and glaciers. But behind the razor wire, none of that beauty matters. Because Spring Creek was designed with one principle in mind: containment through isolation. According to publicly available planning documents, the prison was built in the late 1980s after Alaska faced mounting pressure to house its own inmates rather than sending them out of state. Officials wanted a facility that could hold long-term, high-risk prisoners, men convicted of murder, violent sexual assault, and repeat felony offenses. And they wanted it far away. Spring Creek sits roughly 125 miles south of Anchorage. There is only one highway connecting it to the rest of the state. In winter, that road can become impassable. Avalanches are common. Ice storms shut everything down. According to former corrections staff interviewed in news reports, there were days when even supply trucks couldn't get through. Which meant that once someone was brought here, they were effectively cut off, not just from society, but from options. No easy transfers. No quick medical evacuations. No backup if things went wrong. This wasn't a bug. It was the point. A prison built for men no one wanted anywhere else. Spring Creek was never meant to rehabilitate in the traditional sense. According to Alaska DOC policy statements, its primary role was security and control. Inside its walls, inmates are classified at the highest custody levels. Movement is tightly regulated. Doors are electronic. Cameras cover nearly every angle. Former inmates have described the soundscape in affidavits and lawsuits. Metal doors slamming, intercoms crackling, boots echoing on concrete. There is no silence here, only waiting. According to court filings in multiple civil rights cases, prisoners have alleged extended lockdowns, limited access to programming, and prolonged isolation. The state has consistently defended its policies, arguing that security concerns at Spring Creek require stricter controls than at other Alaska facilities. In legal language, it's called administrative necessity. In human terms, it's called pressure. Pressure that builds slowly. Pressure that never releases. The geography that makes escape meaningless. Most prisons rely on walls, towers, and armed patrols. Spring Creek relies on Alaska. Even if an inmate somehow breached the perimeter, an extremely rare and undocumented scenario, according to DOC records, the environment would finish the job. To the west, Resurrection Bay. Ice-cold water year-round. Hypothermia in minutes. To the east. Dense forest and mountains with no shelter. To the south, open ocean. To the north, a long road watched carefully by law enforcement. There are no nearby neighborhoods. No bus stops. No sympathetic strangers. According to former wardens interviewed by regional media, escape planning simply doesn't exist here because it would be suicidal. Which creates a different psychological reality. At Spring Creek, inmates know they are trapped not just by law but by nature. And that knowledge changes behavior. When control becomes the only currency. In most prisons, power is negotiated between inmates, gangs, and staff. At Spring Creek, power is enforced. According to Department of Justice reviews and state oversight reports, the prison has repeatedly struggled with tension between staff and inmates. Long lockdowns, staff shortages, and harsh weather have all been cited as contributing factors. When lockdowns happen, entire housing units can be confined to their cells for days. Meals delivered through slots. Showers cancelled. Phones shut off. According to inmate grievances cited in lawsuits, these conditions can escalate emotions quickly. Anger doesn't disappear here. It ferments. And Spring Creek houses men who already arrived angry. The men inside. The inmate population at Spring Creek includes individuals convicted of homicide, attempted murder, first-degree assault, and other violent felonies, according to publicly available sentencing records. Some are serving decades. Some are serving life. According to Alaska DOC data, many inmates at Spring Creek have prior disciplinary histories at other institutions, assaults on staff, weapon possession, or organizing disturbances. That history follows them here. Spring Creek isn't where your sentence ends. It's where your reputation catches up with you. And once inside, there's no anonymity. Everyone knows who everyone is. Everyone knows what everyone did, at least according to rumor. And in a place this small, rumor carries weight. A history marked by incidents. Spring Creek has not been free of violence. According to news reports and court filings, the facility has experienced assaults, use of force incidents, and inmate-on-inmate violence over the years. Details are often limited, due to ongoing litigation or privacy protections, but patterns emerge in the public record. Tension spikes during winter. Staffing drops during storms. Lockdowns increase. In several lawsuits, inmates alleged excessive force or unconstitutional conditions. The state has denied wrongdoing in many cases, and some claims were dismissed or settled without admission of liability. What remains undisputed is this. Spring Creek is a pressure cooker. And pressure cookers eventually release, one way or another. The psychological cost of isolation. Mental health professionals have repeatedly warned about the effects of long-term confinement in high-security environments. According to expert testimony cited in court cases involving Spring Creek inmates, prolonged isolation can lead to anxiety, paranoia, depression, and impulse control issues, even in individuals with no prior mental illness. For inmates already struggling with mental health disorders, the effects can be amplified. Former prisoners have described losing track of time. Forgetting faces. Reacting violently to minor provocations. The prison wasn't designed to heal. It was designed to hold. And sometimes, holding is all it does. Why Spring Creek matters. Spring Creek Correctional Center isn't famous like Alcatraz. It doesn't appear in movies. It doesn't have tours. But it represents something fundamental about American punishment, especially in remote states like Alaska. When society decides certain individuals are too dangerous to live among us, where do we put them? And what happens when the place we put them starts shaping them in ways we didn't anticipate? According to policy debates recorded in legislative archives, Alaska has long struggled with balancing public safety, inmate rights, and the realities of geography. Spring Creek is the physical embodiment of that struggle. Concrete versus wilderness. Control versus humanity. Safety versus cost. And behind every policy decision are people, guards and inmates alike, who live inside those consequences every day. By the time the steel doors close behind a man entering Spring Creek, the message is clear. This is the end of the road. But what happens after the road ends is where the real story begins. Lockdown Nation. Spring Creek does not announce when it is about to change. There is no warning bell. No public address countdown. No moment for anyone inside to brace themselves. According to court filings and sworn declarations from former inmates and correctional staff, lockdowns at Spring Creek often begin the same way, quietly, abruptly, and without explanation. A door that should open, doesn't. A movement call that never comes. A meal delivered through a steel slot instead of a chow hall line. And just like that, the prison contracts. Inside Spring Creek, a lockdown is not an event. It is a condition. When the doors stop opening. In most American prisons, lockdowns are temporary responses to emergencies, a fight, a search, a missing tool. At Spring Creek, according to Alaska Department of Corrections records and inmate litigation, lockdowns have sometimes lasted days or weeks. Entire housing units sealed. Showers suspended. Phones disconnected. For inmates, the experience is suffocating. According to affidavits submitted in federal civil rights cases, prisoners describe lying on bunks staring at ceilings, counting cracks in concrete, replaying memories until they blur together. Time loses shape here. Morning and night become irrelevant. Days bleed into one another. And with nowhere to go, the mind turns inward. The design that makes lockdown easy. Spring Creek was engineered for control. Each housing unit is segmented. Doors are electronically controlled from centralized panels. According to DOC facility schematics referenced in oversight reports, officers can isolate individual cells, or entire wings, without physically entering them. From an operational standpoint, it's efficient. From a human standpoint, it's absolute. Once the decision is made, the prison freezes. Correctional officers move less. Inmates move not at all. And in Alaska's long winters, when staffing shortages and weather compound one another, lockdown becomes the default rather than the exception. Staffing on the edge. According to news investigations and state audits, staffing has been a chronic challenge at Spring Creek. The location alone filters out many applicants. Isolation. Weather. Distance from family. Former officers interviewed by Alaska media outlets described 12-hour shifts, mandatory overtime, and being snowed into the facility during storms. When staffing drops below minimum levels, movement stops. Not because of punishment, but because of safety. According to internal DOC communications cited in lawsuits, administrators repeatedly emphasized that fewer officers meant fewer escorts, fewer counts, fewer chances to respond if something went wrong. So the doors stayed shut. The unofficial rules of lockdown. Lockdown changes everything, including the social order. In normal operations, inmates have limited freedoms, work details, education programs, recreation periods. In lockdown, all of that disappears. What remains is reputation. According to inmate testimony in multiple cases, hierarchy during lockdowns becomes rigid. Those with influence, often tied to gang affiliation or prior violence, control access to contraband, information, and favors. The cell becomes both shelter and trap. And privacy becomes impossible. The sound of confinement. Former inmates have described the noise during extended lockdowns as worse than silence. Shouting from cell to cell. Metal kicked in frustration. Intercoms blaring orders no one asked for. According to court filings, some inmates alleged sensory overload, while others described sensory deprivation punctuated by sudden bursts of chaos. A scream. A fight. A door slammed hard enough to rattle concrete. Correctional officers, sealed behind control stations, hear it all, but cannot always respond immediately. And everyone inside knows it. When pressure turns violent. Public records show that Spring Creek has experienced multiple use-of-force incidents over the years, some resulting in serious injury. In several cases cited in federal lawsuits, inmates alleged that force was excessive. The state disputed those claims, arguing officers acted within policy to restore order. The truth, as with many prison incidents, lives somewhere between. What is verified is this: lockdown environments increase volatility. Small provocations escalate. Misunderstandings turn physical. Fear overrides logic. According to corrections experts cited in national studies, prolonged confinement heightens the risk of impulsive violence, especially among populations already prone to aggression. Spring Creek concentrates that risk. The role of segregation. Within Spring Creek exists a deeper layer of isolation, segregation. Often referred to as the hole, segregation units are designed to separate inmates deemed threats to others or themselves. According to DOC policy manuals, segregation can be administrative or disciplinary. In practice, inmates report little difference. Cells are smaller. Movement is rarer. Human contact is minimal. Lights stay on. Windows are narrow. Time stretches endlessly. In court filings, several Spring Creek inmates alleged that segregation aggravated mental health conditions. Expert witnesses testified that prolonged segregation can cause hallucinations, panic attacks, and cognitive decline. The state has acknowledged the risks, while maintaining that segregation is sometimes unavoidable. The men who break first. Not everyone reacts the same way to confinement. Some withdraw. Some explode. According to psychiatric evaluations referenced in litigation, inmates with untreated trauma or mental illness are particularly vulnerable during lockdowns. They pace. They shout. They self-harm. Correctional officers are trained to respond, but resources are limited. Mental health staff are not always on site. Weather delays specialists. Security concerns restrict access. And so, crises sometimes unfold alone. When help can't get in. Spring Creek's isolation affects more than inmates. Medical emergencies are complicated by geography. According to news reports and testimony from former staff, severe weather has delayed outside medical transport on multiple occasions. Helicopters grounded. Roads closed. Ambulances hours away. In those moments, the prison becomes its own hospital. And sometimes, it's not enough. While the Department of Corrections has stated that emergency protocols are in place, critics argue that isolation creates unavoidable risks, especially for aging or medically fragile inmates. Lawsuits from the inside. Spring Creek has been named in multiple civil lawsuits over conditions of confinement. According to publicly available court records, claims have included excessive force, inadequate medical care, prolonged isolation, retaliation for grievances. Some cases were dismissed. Some were settled. Others remain sealed or unresolved. What matters is not the outcome of any single case, but the pattern. Spring Creek repeatedly appears in legal challenges because of what it represents, the extreme end of incarceration. The officers behind the glass. Correctional officers at Spring Creek are not immune to the pressure. According to interviews published in Alaska news outlets, officers described chronic stress, hypervigilance, and burnout. They work among men convicted of extreme violence. They operate in a facility where backup can be delayed by weather. They enforce rules that inmates hate, and sometimes challenge physically. Many officers carry the stress home. Some don't last. Turnover has been a persistent issue, according to DOC staffing reports. And every new officer means a learning curve, one that inmates quickly detect. The unseen consequences. Lockdown doesn't just pause life inside Spring Creek. It reshapes it. Programs are canceled. Education stalls. Rehabilitation becomes theoretical. According to prison reform advocates cited in legislative hearings, long-term reliance on lockdown undermines the very goals corrections systems claim to pursue. But administrators counter with a stark reality: safety comes first. And at Spring Creek, safety often means stillness. Winter, the season of maximum control. In Alaska, winter isn't a season, it's a condition. Snow piles against fences. Ice coats walkways. Darkness stretches for months. According to DOC operational logs referenced in oversight reviews, winter correlates with increased lockdown frequency. Staff call out. Travel halts. Risk tolerance drops. Inside the prison, inmates feel it immediately. Movement shrinks. Tempers shorten. Hope thins. Winter at Spring Creek is confinement within confinement. The myth of doing time. In popular culture, prison sentences are measured in years. At Spring Creek, they're measured in endurance. Inmate statements submitted to courts often describe time not as a line but as a weight. Each lockdown adds mass. Each isolation period adds strain. And eventually, something gives. Not always in ways anyone expects. Why lockdown defines Spring Creek? Spring Creek is not unique because it locks people up. It is unique because it locks people down, repeatedly, predictably, and for long stretches. According to corrections analysts, this operational reality shapes every interaction inside the prison. Trust erodes. Suspicion grows. Violence becomes more likely, not less. And yet, from the outside, Spring Creek remains largely invisible. No cameras. No tours. No headlines. Until something goes very wrong. By the end of a long lockdown, inmates emerge changed. Some quieter. Some angrier. Some visibly broken. And the officers who unlock those doors know it. Because Spring Creek doesn't release pressure gently. It waits. And when it finally releases, it does so violently. When the system breaks, Spring Creek does not fail all at once. It fractures. According to court records, internal reviews, and investigative journalism, the most serious incidents inside Spring Creek Correctional Center did not begin with riots or mass uprisings. They began with routine days that slowly slipped out of control, missed warning signs, exhausted staff, and men pushed past psychological limits. This chapter is about what happens when containment stops working. Not in theory. Not in policy memos. But in real moments, with real consequences. The incidents that never make the news. Most violence at Spring Creek never reaches national headlines. According to Alaska Department of Corrections incident summaries obtained by reporters through public records requests, the majority of use of force events are logged quietly: dates, times, injuries, reports filed. Assaults broken up. Restraints applied. Medical evaluations conducted. Then silence. No press conference. No public explanation. Because prisons are designed to absorb violence without showing it. And Spring Creek absorbs a lot. The day something went wrong. According to multiple lawsuits and corroborated staff accounts referenced in investigative reporting, one particular winter lockdown, its exact date redacted in court documents, followed a familiar pattern. Staffing shortages. Weather delays. Movement restrictions. But what followed was not routine. An inmate, identified in court filings only by initials to protect privacy, had a documented history of mental health instability and prior disciplinary infractions. According to medical records summarized in legal filings, he had requested psychiatric support weeks earlier. The request was logged. The wait began. During lockdown, access to mental health staff was limited. According to testimony, security concerns delayed cell-side evaluations. Inside a concrete box, the pressure built. What happened next is disputed. Inmate witnesses allege the men began shouting for help. Staff reports describe noncompliance and threats. What is undisputed is the outcome: force was used, restraints were applied, and the inmate was later transported for emergency medical care. The lawsuit that followed alleged excessive force and deliberate indifference. The state denied wrongdoing. The case settled quietly. No admission of fault. No systemic reform mandated. Just another fracture sealed over. Why Spring Creek is different. Violence occurs in prisons everywhere. What distinguishes Spring Creek, according to corrections experts interviewed in national publications, is how little margin for error exists. In urban prisons, backup is minutes away. In Alaska, backup is weather dependent. If a situation escalates beyond control, options narrow fast. That reality shapes decision-making. Officers are trained to act decisively. Hesitation can cost lives. But decisiveness, under stress, can cross lines. And when it does, accountability becomes complicated. The camera problem. Modern prisons rely heavily on surveillance. Spring Creek is no exception. According to facility descriptions in oversight reports, cameras cover housing units, corridors, and control points. But cameras do not capture everything. Blind spots exist. Audio is limited. Context is missing. In lawsuits alleging misconduct, video evidence is often inconclusive, grainy angles, obstructed views, moments just out of frame. What one person sees as control, another sees as brutality. And juries rarely see any of it. Most cases never reach trial. Inmate on inmate violence. Not all breakdowns involve staff. According to DOC disciplinary data cited in legislative hearings, Spring Creek has recorded multiple serious inmate-on-inmate assaults, including stabbings using improvised weapons. These weapons are rarely sophisticated. Sharpened metal from bed frames. Pieces of plastic hardened and honed. Everyday objects turned lethal. During lockdowns, supervision is reduced. Movement is limited. Tension spikes. And when doors finally open, even briefly, the release can be explosive. According to court testimony, some assaults lasted seconds. Others continued until officers could safely intervene. In several cases, victims suffered permanent injuries. Some were transferred out of state for medical care. Some never returned to general population. The Code of Silence. Inside Spring Creek, cooperation with investigations is rare. According to former inmates interviewed by journalists, reporting violence carries consequences. Snitch labels. Retaliation. Isolation. Even victims often refuse to name attackers. Staff face a similar dilemma. According to whistleblower complaints cited in media reports, officers who report misconduct risk ostracization, stalled careers, or reassignment. The system incentivizes quiet resolution. And quiet resolution hides patterns. Federal scrutiny. Spring Creek has not escaped outside attention. According to Department of Justice correspondence referenced in Alaska legislative records, federal authorities have periodically reviewed conditions within the state's prison system, including Spring Creek. These reviews focus on constitutional standards. Use of force. Medical care. Mental health treatment. Findings are often mixed. Concerns noted. Improvements acknowledged. Recommendations issued. But enforcement is limited unless systemic violations are proven. And proving systemic failure inside a sealed institution is extraordinarily difficult. The men who don't leave. Some inmates at Spring Creek will never walk free. Life sentences. Multiple decades. According to sentencing data, Alaska has a higher per capita rate of long-term incarceration than many states, due in part to violent crime patterns in remote communities. For these men, Spring Creek is not a stop. It is the destination. And when violence erupts, it is often among those with nothing left to lose. Mental health at the breaking point. Court filings repeatedly highlight mental health as a fault line. In several cases, expert witnesses testified that inmates exhibiting clear signs of psychological distress were disciplined rather than treated. The state disputes this characterization, pointing to limited resources and security constraints. Both can be true. Spring Creek was not built as a psychiatric hospital. But it houses many who need one. And when treatment fails, behavior deteriorates. A night that changed policy. According to reports from Alaska public media and internal DOC memoranda later referenced in lawsuits, one violent incident, details partially redacted, prompted a temporary policy shift. Use of force procedures were reviewed. Training protocols updated. Reporting requirements tightened. For a time, scrutiny increased. Then attention moved on. As it always does. The cost to staff. Violence does not end with inmates. Correctional officers at Spring Creek have been injured on duty, some seriously. According to workers' compensation claims cited in state audits, injuries include broken bones, concussions, and long-term psychological trauma. Post-traumatic stress is common. Officers replay incidents. Second-guess decisions. Carry the weight home. Some leave the profession entirely. Others stay, because in rural Alaska, options are limited. When nature makes it worse. Spring Creek's isolation amplifies every crisis. During one documented winter storm, according to news reports, transportation was halted for days. An injured inmate waited longer than standard protocol for outside care. Staff worked extended shifts. Supplies ran low. Nothing catastrophic occurred, but the margin was thin. In a different scenario, it could have ended very differently. The question no one answers. Every investigation circles the same unresolved question. Is Spring Creek operating at the edge of what is constitutionally acceptable, or beyond it? Courts have not delivered a definitive answer. Cases settle. Claims expire. Evidence fades. And the prison continues operating. Why breakdowns matter? Prisons are designed to contain violence. When violence repeatedly escapes containment, it signals a deeper issue. At Spring Creek, that issue may not be malice. It may be design. A facility built for isolation, operating under extreme conditions, housing the most volatile population in the state. Something eventually gives. The question is not if. It's when, and how bad it will be. The aftermath no one sees. After incidents, life resumes. Cells are cleaned. Reports are filed. Shifts rotate. From the outside, nothing changes. But inside, memories linger. Inmates remember who froze. Who fought. Who watched. Officers remember who hesitated. Who crossed lines. Who took the blame. And Spring Creek absorbs it all, quietly. The edge of control. By now, a pattern is clear. Lockdowns create pressure. Pressure leads to breakdowns. Breakdowns expose limits. Spring Creek exists at those limits. And beyond them lies something no system wants to confront. Failure. Because when control depends on isolation. And isolation becomes constant. Control stops being control. It becomes survival. And survival, inside Spring Creek, has a way of rewriting every rule. The cost of containment. Spring Creek does not exist in a vacuum. Every decision made inside its walls echoes outward, into courtrooms, legislative chambers, union halls, and the lives of people who will never see the inside of a cell but still carry its consequences. This chapter is about the cost. Not just financial. Not just political. The human cost, measured in lawsuits, broken careers, damaged minds, and a system struggling to justify the weight it places on everyone inside. The paper trail of a prison. Every serious incident at Spring Creek Correctional Center creates paperwork. Incident reports. Medical evaluations. Internal reviews. And sometimes, lawsuits. According to publicly available court dockets and reporting by Alaska media outlets, Spring Creek has been named repeatedly in civil litigation over the past decades. The claims vary, but the themes repeat. Excessive use of force. Inadequate medical or mental health care. Prolonged isolation. Retaliation against inmates who file grievances. Not every claim is upheld. Not every claim is dismissed. Many cases settle quietly. From a legal standpoint, settlement is efficient. From a public standpoint, it is opaque. No admission of wrongdoing. No precedent set. No systemic judgment rendered. Just money exchanged, and silence. Why settlements matter. According to former state attorneys interviewed by investigative journalists, settlements are often cheaper than trials. Trials expose evidence. Trials create records. Trials attract attention. Settlements do none of that. But they accumulate. Each one represents an allegation serious enough to merit negotiation. And over time, those allegations form a pattern. A pattern that raises uncomfortable questions about whether Spring Creek's operating model creates unavoidable risk or unavoidable harm. The view from Juneau. Inside the Alaska State Legislature, Spring Creek is a recurring subject. According to committee hearing transcripts and budget discussions, lawmakers regularly confront the same dilemma. Spring Creek is expensive. But replacing it, or fundamentally changing it, would be even more expensive. The facility requires specialized staff. Higher security measures. Remote logistics. Every gallon of fuel costs more. Every repair takes longer. Every staffing vacancy creates risk. Yet legislators also hear from advocacy groups, civil rights attorneys, and families of inmates who describe conditions as excessive, even by maximum security standards. And the question resurfaces. Is Spring Creek the only way Alaska can safely incarcerate its most violent offenders? Or is it simply the way Alaska has accepted? The union perspective. Correctional officers at Spring Creek are represented by labor unions that have repeatedly raised concerns about safety and staffing. According to union statements quoted in news reports, officers describe working in an environment where staffing shortages are chronic. Mandatory overtime is common. Backup can be delayed by hours or days. From their perspective, strict control is not cruelty, it's survival. Officers point to incidents where hesitation resulted in injury. They emphasize that Spring Creek houses individuals with long histories of violence. And they argue that critics underestimate the danger. In this framing, lockdowns are not punishment. They are prevention. The advocacy response. Civil liberties organizations see it differently. According to reports by prison reform advocates and testimony presented in legislative hearings, Spring Creek exemplifies the risks of extreme isolation. They argue that prolonged lockdowns and segregation increase violence rather than reduce it, deteriorate mental health, make reintegration into society more difficult. Some advocates have called for independent oversight, reduced reliance on segregation, and expanded mental health services. Others have gone further, questioning whether Spring Creek, as currently operated, meets constitutional standards. These debates rarely reach resolution, because each side is arguing from lived experience. The families left outside. For families of inmates, Spring Creek might as well be another country. Visits require travel across Alaska, often by plane, then by car, then through weather that can shut everything down. According to family testimony cited in court filings, visitation is frequently canceled due to lockdowns or staffing issues. Phone calls are limited. Mail is delayed. For some families, months pass without direct contact. And while incarceration is meant to punish the offender, not the family, the reality is more complicated. Spring Creek's isolation multiplies the distance. The men who age inside. As years pass, Spring Creek's population changes. Men sentenced in their 20s grow old behind concrete. According to Alaska DOC demographic data, the number of aging inmates has steadily increased, even in maximum security facilities. Age brings new challenges. Chronic illness. Mobility issues. Cognitive decline. Facilities designed for control struggle to adapt. Wheelchairs don't fit easily through sally ports. Medical appointments require extra security. Weather complicates transport. And critics argue that Spring Creek was never designed to house elderly inmates long-term. Yet they remain. Because there is nowhere else to send them. The psychological accounting. Beyond physical aging lies something harder to measure, psychological wear. Court filings include declarations from inmates describing long-term emotional numbness, paranoia, and difficulty communicating after years of isolation. Mental health experts cited in those cases warn of lasting effects. Not temporary distress. Permanent change. Impulse control weakens. Social skills erode. Trust disappears. For inmates eventually released, yes, some are, re-entry becomes a minefield. According to parole reports and expert testimony, individuals released from highly restrictive environments face higher risks of failure. The system contains them well, but it may not prepare them at all. The public safety paradox. Spring Creek exists to protect the public. That is its core justification. But critics argue that the same practices that maintain order inside may undermine safety outside. If extreme isolation increases aggression. If untreated mental illness worsens. If re-entry becomes harder. Then the question becomes uncomfortable. Is maximum containment always maximum safety? There is no easy answer. And policymakers rarely frame it that way. Why oversight stalls? Independent oversight of prisons is notoriously difficult. According to watchdog groups, barriers include restricted access, confidentiality laws, institutional resistance, Spring Creek's location compounds the problem. Inspectors must travel far. Weather delays visits. Interviews are limited. And without sustained attention, momentum fades. Reports are filed. Recommendations issued. Then attention shifts elsewhere. Spring Creek remains. The money question. According to state budget documents, Spring Creek costs significantly more per inmate than lower security facilities. Remote operations. Security infrastructure. Specialized staffing. And yet, reducing costs by scaling back security is politically unthinkable. No legislator wants to be blamed for a tragedy. So the funding continues. Year after year. The silent trade-off. What rarely appears in budget spreadsheets is the silent trade-off. Safety through severity. Every layer of control reduces risk in one direction and increases it in another. Fewer movements mean fewer opportunities for assault. But more isolation means more psychological stress. Fewer transfers mean stability. But also stagnation. Spring Creek embodies this trade-off in its most extreme form. The international comparison. In comparative studies cited by reform advocates, other Western countries rely less on long-term isolation, even for violent offenders. More mental health integration. More gradual security transitions. More oversight. Alaska's geography complicates direct comparison. But the contrast raises questions. Is Spring Creek a necessity, or a habit? The people in the middle. Between policy and philosophy stand real people. Correctional officers who want to go home safe. Inmates who want to survive with their minds intact. Administrators balancing impossible demands. Most are not villains. Most are not heroes. They are participants in a system that rewards containment and punishes uncertainty. And Spring Creek leaves very little room for uncertainty. The cost you can't measure. Some costs never appear in court filings or budgets. The officer who wakes up from nightmares. The inmate who forgets how to speak calmly. The family that stops visiting because it hurts too much. These costs accumulate quietly. And they follow people long after their connection to Spring Creek ends. Why this chapter matters. Spring Creek is not just a prison. It is a case study in what happens when a system prioritizes control above all else, and then sustains that priority for decades. It forces society to confront uncomfortable truths. Extreme environments shape extreme behavior. Isolation is not neutral. Safety has a price. And someone always pays it. As long as Spring Creek stands at the end of the road, Alaska will continue to send its most dangerous men there. And as long as it does, the question will remain. How much containment is too much? And who decides? Because the walls at Spring Creek don't just hold people in. They hold decisions in place. Decisions that define what justice looks like. At the very edge of the world. The edge of America. There is a moment at Spring Creek that almost no one talks about. It happens late at night. The wind comes off the bay without warning, slamming into concrete and steel. Snow rattles against the outer walls. The highway beyond the fence is empty, no headlights, no traffic, no sign of life moving in either direction. Inside, most of the prison is locked down. Lights hum. Cameras blink. Men lie awake in narrow cells, staring at ceilings they've memorized down to the smallest crack. This is what the end of the road sounds like. And this is where the story of Spring Creek truly lives. Not in court filings or budget hearings, but in the quiet realization that for everyone inside, tomorrow will look almost exactly like today. What Spring Creek was meant to be. When Spring Creek was built, according to state planning records and historical reporting, it was intended as a solution. Alaska needed a place to hold inmates it could not safely house elsewhere. A place secure enough to manage the most violent offenders. A place isolated enough to prevent escape and outside interference. In that narrow sense, Spring Creek worked. Escapes are virtually non-existent. Large-scale riots are rare. Control is maintained. From a purely mechanical perspective, the prison does its job. But systems are not only judged by whether they function. They are judged by what they produce over time. And Spring Creek has been producing consequences for decades. The men who leave, and those who don't. Most people assume that no one ever leaves Spring Creek. That's not entirely true. According to Department of Corrections data referenced in parole proceedings, some inmates do eventually transition out, either to lower security facilities or back into society. But the transition is rarely smooth. Years of extreme control do not dissolve overnight. Former inmates have described, in interviews and sworn statements, being overwhelmed by basic choices. What to eat. Where to stand. How close to get to another person. Noise becomes unbearable. Crowds feel threatening. Silence feels unnatural. For others, Spring Creek is permanent. Life sentences. Stacked sentences. No parole eligibility. For them, the prison is not a chapter. It is the entire book. The officers who stay. Correctional officers come and go. But some stay for decades. They learn the rhythms of the prison, the way tension builds before a lockdown, the subtle shifts in inmate behavior that signal trouble. They know which units are volatile. Which inmates are unpredictable. Which nights will be long. According to interviews published in regional media, veteran officers describe Spring Creek as a place that changes you. Hypervigilance becomes normal. Dark humor becomes survival. Emotional distance becomes necessary. Many officers say they believe in the mission, keeping the public safe. But belief does not cancel cost. Divorces. Burnout. Injuries, both physical and psychological. Some officers retire early. Some leave the state. Some carry the prison with them long after their last shift. The system that can't admit doubt. Institutions rarely admit uncertainty. Spring Creek is no exception. Official statements emphasize safety, policy compliance, and ongoing improvement. And in many ways, those claims are accurate. Training evolves. Procedures are reviewed. Technology improves. But the core model remains unchanged. Extreme isolation. High control. Limited flexibility. Because admitting that the model itself might be flawed would require confronting a terrifying possibility. That there may be no humane way to operate a place like Spring Creek. The question of necessity. Supporters of the prison argue necessity. Alaska is vast. Communities are small. Violent crime has devastating impact. There are individuals who, by their actions, have demonstrated an ongoing danger to others. Spring Creek contains that danger. Critics argue inevitability is not the same as justification. That containment does not require deprivation. That security does not require psychological harm. That isolation should not become routine. Both sides point to evidence. Both sides claim realism. And in the middle stands Spring Creek, unchanged. What the records don't show. Court filings, incident reports, and news stories capture only fragments of reality. They record what happened, but not how it felt. They document injuries, but not fear. They log days, but not nights. They do not show the men who stop speaking. The officer who flinches at sudden noise. The family member who stops writing letters because the silence hurts less. These are not anomalies. They are consequences. The role of distance. Spring Creek's location is not accidental. Distance reduces scrutiny. Distance reduces access. Distance reduces urgency. Out of sight becomes out of mind. For most Americans, Alaska is already abstract, a place of glaciers and wildlife documentaries. A maximum security prison on the Kenai Peninsula might as well exist on another planet. That distance allows Spring Creek to persist without national attention. And without attention, systems rarely change. The moral weight of containment. At its core, Spring Creek raises a question that no policy memo can answer. What do we owe the people we incarcerate, especially those who have done terrible things? Is safety enough? Is survival enough? Is control enough? Or does justice demand something more, even in places built for the worst among us? There is no consensus. And perhaps there never will be. But the question does not disappear just because it is uncomfortable. The future of Spring Creek. As of the most recent reporting, Spring Creek remains operational. No closure announced. No radical overhaul approved. Incremental changes continue. More training here. Updated policies there. But the prison's role remains the same. The end of the road. The last stop. The place Alaska sends men it cannot manage anywhere else. And as long as that role exists, so will the tension. Why this story matters. Spring Creek is not just an Alaska story. It is an American story. A story about what happens when geography, fear, and punishment intersect. A story about how easily extreme measures become normal when applied far from view. A story about the quiet ways systems shape people, on both sides of the bars. Most people will never see Spring Creek. They will never hear its doors close. Never feel its isolation. Never count time the way it demands. But the values that built it belong to all of us. The last image. Imagine the prison at night. Lights glowing against snow. Mountains looming in darkness. Ocean wind cutting through everything. Inside, men wait. Officers watch. And the world beyond the fence keeps moving, unaware, unaffected, untouched. Spring Creek does exactly what it was designed to do. The question is whether we are prepared to accept everything that design costs. Because at the edge of America, in a place where escape is pointless and distance is absolute, Spring Creek stands as a reminder. Some problems are not solved. They are contained. And containment always leaves something behind. What remains after the doors close? There is a final illusion people hold about places like Spring Creek. That when the doors close, the story ends. In reality, that's when the story lingers. Because prisons do not exist only in the present tense. They exist in memory. In behavior. In the people who leave, and in the people who never do. This chapter is not about incidents or policies. It is about residue. What remains after years of isolation, control, and containment, and how Spring Creek continues to shape lives long after the gates are locked for the night. The myth of closure. For the public, incarceration offers a sense of closure. A crime happens. A trial is held. A sentence is imposed. Justice feels complete. Spring Creek reinforces that illusion. According to sentencing records and court statements, judges often describe long-term incarceration as a way to permanently remove danger from society. And in a narrow sense, it works. The offender is gone. The community breathes easier. The case fades from headlines. But closure assumes something ends. At Spring Creek, very little actually does. The men who carry Spring Creek with them. Former inmates who leave Spring Creek rarely describe it as something they escaped. They describe it as something they survived. According to parole evaluations, re-entry interviews, and sworn statements submitted in post-release litigation, many former inmates struggle with basic social reintegration. They flinch at sudden movements. They struggle with eye contact. They react aggressively to minor stress. Years of hypercontrol do not simply switch off. In Spring Creek, movement is permission-based. Speech is measured. Emotion is dangerous. Outside, those rules collapse. And collapse creates chaos. When freedom feels like a threat. Parole officers interviewed by Alaska media have described a pattern among individuals released from high-security environments. Freedom overwhelms them. Too many choices. Too much noise. Too little structure. Some return to criminal behavior not out of malice, but because confinement taught them that control equals safety. Spring Creek conditions reinforce that lesson daily. And when the structure disappears, panic fills the gap. Recidivism becomes more likely, not because of who they were, but because of what they became inside. The invisible victims. There is a group affected by Spring Creek that is almost never mentioned. Children. According to family court records and advocacy reports, many inmates housed at Spring Creek are parents. Their children grow up with absence normalized. Missed birthdays. Censored letters. Cancelled visits. Distance compounds everything. A child in Anchorage may never see a parent housed on the Kenai Peninsula due to cost and weather. Over time, absence becomes identity. And the cycle quietly continues. The officers who never fully leave. Correctional officers retire. They turn in badges. They clear lockers. They walk out. But Spring Creek often follows them. According to mental health professionals who have worked with corrections staff, symptoms of long-term stress are common. Hypervigilance. Sleep disturbances. Emotional detachment. Officers learn to read danger in posture, tone, and silence. Outside the prison, those instincts don't disappear. Some struggle in crowds. Some avoid social settings. Some lose relationships they don't know how to maintain. Spring Creek trains survival skills that do not translate well to civilian life. The normalization of extremes. Perhaps the most lasting impact of Spring Creek is normalization. Inside, extreme conditions become routine. Extended lockdowns feel ordinary. Isolation becomes expected. Force becomes procedural. Over time, both staff and inmates recalibrate their sense of what is normal. What once felt extreme becomes baseline. This normalization is dangerous, not because of intent, but because of drift. Boundaries shift quietly. Thresholds rise. Concerns are minimized. And by the time something feels wrong again, it has often been wrong for years. The stories that never get told. There are incidents at Spring Creek that never appear in lawsuits or news reports. Moments too small to document, but too significant to forget. An inmate who stops eating. An officer who hesitates before entering a cell. A quiet agreement between rivals not to escalate, because lockdown would punish everyone. These moments shape daily life. They do not show up in statistics. But they define the culture. Why reform is so difficult. Spring Creek is not resistant to reform because people are cruel. It is resistant because the system is rigid. Every change introduces risk. Every reduction in control feels dangerous. Every experiment could fail catastrophically. Administrators operate under constant fear of the worst-case scenario. And fear rewards conservatism. Do what worked yesterday. Avoid attention. Contain risk. Innovation dies quietly in that environment. The national context. Spring Creek is extreme, but not unique. Across the United States, high-security prisons rely on similar strategies: isolation, lockdowns, rigid control. What makes Spring Creek stand out is geography. Isolation here is not just architectural, it is environmental. There is no nearby alternative facility. No easy transfer. No rapid response. Spring Creek is both a prison and a pressure sink for the entire state. That makes it indispensable and untouchable. What success even means. Ask different stakeholders what success looks like at Spring Creek, and you will get different answers. Administrators. No escapes. No riots. No deaths. Officers. Going home uninjured. Lawmakers. No scandals. Controlled costs. Advocates. Humane conditions. Constitutional compliance. Inmates. Survival. None of these definitions align perfectly. And when success is undefined, the default becomes maintenance. The silence around mental health. Mental health remains the unresolved core issue. Court filings, expert testimony, and advocacy reports all point to the same conclusion. Spring Creek houses more psychological need than it can adequately treat. But acknowledging that fully would require reimagining the prison's purpose. And reimagining purpose threatens stability. So the issue remains partially addressed. Enough to function. Not enough to heal. The final contradiction. Spring Creek is built to contain danger. Yet it produces damaged people. Spring Creek is built for safety. Yet it relies on conditions that create instability. Spring Creek is built to be permanent. Yet it operates in constant crisis management. This contradiction is not accidental. It is structural. What happens if nothing changes? If Spring Creek continues as it is, the future is predictable. More lawsuits. More settlements. More quiet suffering. Incremental reforms. No transformation. The prison will age. The population will age. The costs will rise. And the questions will remain unanswered. Why this matters to everyone. It is easy to dismiss Spring Creek as a place for people who deserve it. But systems built for the margins often migrate inward. Practices tested on the most isolated populations shape broader policy. What is acceptable there becomes acceptable elsewhere. Spring Creek is not separate from society. It is a reflection of it. The lasting image. Picture Spring Creek one final time. Not during a crisis. Not during an incident. Just an ordinary day. Guards changing shifts. Inmates lining up for count. Wind rolling off the bay. Nothing dramatic. Nothing newsworthy. Just a system doing exactly what it was designed to do, day after day, year after year. And that may be the most unsettling part. Because it means Spring Creek doesn't need to fail to cause harm. It only needs to continue. The final question. At the edge of America, there is a prison where escape is pointless and isolation is total. It keeps the public safe. But at a cost that is rarely measured and never fully acknowledged. The question is no longer whether Spring Creek works. The question is whether we are willing to look honestly at what it costs, and who pays that cost when the doors close and the lights stay on. Because long after sentences are served, careers end, and headlines fade. Spring Creek remains. And so do the consequences. When the story doesn't end. When documentaries end, there is usually resolution. A verdict. A confession. A sentence. Something that tells the audience, this is where the story stops. Spring Creek doesn't offer that. Because Spring Creek is not a moment in time. It's a condition. While this video ends, the prison does not. Tonight, the doors will still lock. The counts will still be taken. The wind will still batter concrete and steel on the edge of the Kenai Peninsula. And inside, people will still be waiting. There is a temptation, especially in true crime, to reduce places like this to symbols. To call them necessary. To call them cruel. To call them broken. But the truth is more uncomfortable. Spring Creek is functional. It does what it was designed to do. It contains danger. It isolates risk. It removes people's society fears from society itself. And that is precisely why it matters. Because the most dangerous systems are not the ones that collapse. They are the ones that work, quietly, relentlessly, without ever asking whether the cost has become too high. When a crime happens, outrage is immediate. There is grief. There is fear. There is anger. And in that moment, punishment feels simple. Lock them away. Keep us safe. Make sure it never happens again. Spring Creek is the physical answer to that demand. But punishment doesn't freeze time. People change inside these walls, sometimes for the better, often for the worse. Isolation reshapes behavior. Control reshapes identity. Silence reshapes thought. And when we stop paying attention, those changes don't stop happening. They just stop being visible. There is a phrase often used in corrections. We're not here to punish. We're here to manage. Spring Creek manages relentlessly. It manages violence. It manages risk. It manages men who cannot be managed anywhere else. But management is not neutral. Every policy choice leaves a mark. Every lockdown rewrites behavior. Every year spent in extreme isolation alters something permanent. These are not abstractions. They are neurological. They are psychological. They are human. For correctional officers, Spring Creek is not a symbol. It is a workplace where mistakes can be fatal. Where hesitation can mean injury. Where experience matters more than theory. Many officers believe, sincerely, that without strict control, the prison would become unmanageable. And they may be right. But belief does not erase consequence. The same environment that keeps officers alive can quietly dismantle their emotional lives. Hypervigilance doesn't turn off at home. Suspicion doesn't disappear at retirement. Stress doesn't stay behind the fence. Spring Creek takes something from everyone who passes through it. For inmates, the cost is more obvious, but no less complex. Some committed acts so violent that society cannot imagine forgiving them. Others arrived here after years of escalating punishment, not rehabilitation. Some will never leave. Others will, but not unchanged. The question is not whether they deserve punishment. The question is whether punishment must look like this forever. Because systems that never evolve don't just punish past crimes. They shape future ones. And then there is the public, the vast majority of people who will never see Spring Creek, never hear its doors close, never feel the way time stretches inside concrete walls. For the public, Spring Creek exists as reassurance. It's handled. They're gone. We're safe. That reassurance comes at the cost of curiosity. What happens after sentencing? What happens after years of isolation? What happens when control becomes the only language left? Those questions are easy to ignore when the answers live thousands of miles away in a place defined by distance. Spring Creek sits at the edge of America not just geographically, but morally. It is where certainty replaces nuance. Where fear outweighs reform. Where containment becomes the goal rather than the outcome. And once a system reaches that point, it becomes very hard to change, because change introduces risk. No politician wants to be responsible for easing conditions and then watching something go wrong. No administrator wants to gamble with safety. No officer wants to enter a unit that feels less controlled than before. So the system remains. Not because it is perfect, but because it is familiar. There is something unsettling about how quiet Spring Creek is. No protests at the gate. No national debates. No viral footage. Just routine. That quiet is not proof of success. It is proof of distance. And distance has always been one of the most powerful tools in punishment. Out of sight. Out of mind. Out of accountability. True crime often asks, how could someone do this? Spring Creek forces a different question. What happens when we decide we're done asking questions? When the answer to violence becomes permanent isolation. When the response to danger becomes disappearance. When the solution becomes a place so far away that no one has to think about it anymore. That is not a question with an easy answer. But it is a question worth sitting with. Because places like Spring Creek are mirrors. They reflect what a society fears most. They reflect what it values least. They reflect how far it is willing to go to feel safe. And mirrors don't judge. They just show you what's there. Tonight, Spring Creek will look the same as it did yesterday. Lights against snow. Wind against steel. Men behind doors. Nothing dramatic. Nothing cinematic. Just continuation. And maybe that's the most important thing to understand. Spring Creek doesn't need riots or scandals to matter. It matters because it endures. Because it represents decisions made long ago that still shape lives today. Because it asks whether safety achieved through isolation is safety at all, or just silence. This documentary doesn't tell you what to think. It doesn't offer villains or heroes. It offers a place, and asks you to sit with what that place represents. At the end of the road. At the edge of America. In a prison designed so no one ever has to look too closely.